Martin Ehl from Czech Economic Daily, and I will be moderator of this morning Visegrad breakfast session in cooperation with the European Liberal Forum on the topic which sounds important, interesting, and strange at the same time. It's information sovereignty in the times of COVID-19, foreign and domestic malign influence on media. We have three excellent speakers. We will start with Miroslava Sawiris, who is Research Fellow on Democracy and Resilience Program in Globsec. Then we will go to Francesco Cappelletti, Research Fellow at the European Liberal Forum. And the third speaker will be Wojciech Przybylski, Editor-in-Chief of Visegrad Insight magazine. And then we will go with the discussion. The ground rules are that everybody except me is switching the microphone now off, not to have a noisy background. And you can use the usual chat or waving at me to ask the questions or to try to participate in the discussion. We will go for 1 hour. First part will be on the record. We will have two presentations and short debate about the presentations, and then we will switch off the recording, and the journalists participating will also switch off the recording if they do, and then we will have a off the record discussion for, let's say, second half. We will see how it will, if it will be exactly half and half. So without further ado, I would ask Miroslava to start with her presentation.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for having me and for having the chance to contribute to this very interesting topic. As Martin said, I have a short presentation, so I'm just going to share my screen now with you. Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to move this panel away so that it doesn't bother me. So the topic of my presentation is the impact of successful information operations on public perception on one hand, and on the other hand, what can we do about it? In particular, you know, the disruption of disinformation economic model. So basically disrupting the advertising revenue that sustains basically a lot of disinformation efforts. So I'll start by COVID-19 because, you know, this pandemic has been defining our situations for the past few months. And as we all know, disinformation and influence operations in this time have really flourished. This is not just because of the pandemic, you know, and the fact that the populations sort of feel insecure, but also because of features of digital information environment, you know, which we basically live in today. So digital platforms act as gatekeepers of information. Recent data from Statista shows that over 50% of populations in Slovakia, Romania, and Hungary already access their news from digital platforms. And this impacts the way we consume information and the way we package information in a very specific way, because all types of content on digital platforms compete for the same attention of the user, you know. So you have basically, let's say, academic, textual, sort of complex content right next to, let's say, memes of kitties and puppies, and very emotional, sensationalist type of content. And in this kind of environment where all of these types of content are fed into one news feed, it's very difficult to compete for users' attention without actually resorting to sensationalist type of content. So even it's not just about digital platforms, but it's also about news pages sort of accommodating to this type of environment in order to be able to get their content well received. So in this way, the information environment itself is changing, you know, and at our last webinar with Rand Waltzman, he pointed out quite correctly that not everybody is very skillful at playing these games. So for example, you know, the communications from the European Union, which is sometimes, you know, very dry and very factual, doesn't actually get to the desired audiences because others do it far better, let's say. And another thing which is very useful to consider when thinking about COVID-19 disinformation environment is Peter Kreko's idea of the demand side of disinformation. So in other words, that the harmful narratives and the COVID-19 narratives are always tailored to the selected audiences in a way that it works and plays into their already preconceived ideas. So actually creating impactful disinformation campaign is very easy because all you need to know is to know the vulnerabilities of your population, and that's not very difficult. And then, you know, there's social media and web pages at your disposal. You can exploit these very easy, plus you can actually, you know, generate ads from ad revenue. So in Slovakia, for example, I'm going to speak now about this Globsec vulnerability report, which my colleagues, Katarina Klingova and Dominika Hajdu, published recently. For example, 69% of Slovaks, you know, would be willing to trade some of their freedoms for greater security. So this is the type of vulnerability that which is then very easily exploited by disinformation actors. And so we have seen that the COVID-19 disinformation simply tapped into some of these fears. So I'm now briefly going to give you a few examples from our intelligence briefing in May. We have been monitoring some of these COVID-19 disinformation and harmful narratives. And so the main regional narratives, which I'm sure all of us are familiar with, you know, are, for example, that, you know, the EU has failed, you know, its member states, that China and Russia are the only countries actually helping, and that COVID-19 is a US-made biological weapon, or, for example, that migrants, you know, who are trying to enter EU are Trojan horses carrying the virus. But what is more interesting to me is also that when you look at the regional narratives, when you look at Hungary, for example, you'll see that these type of narratives, again, are tailored to the audience. So there you will see that the narrative is more framed in a way that COVID-19 is an artificial genocide concocted by the global elite, you know, which is seeking to decimate Earth's population. And so this builds on the anti-elitist, anti-Soros sentiment already present in the country. In Slovakia, one of the most prevalent narratives that we have seen was that the Americans are actually using the epidemic to take over Slovak military assets, you know, and this makes sense when you look at the fact that 53% of Slovaks perceive US as a threat, despite the fact that we both are members of NATO, and even NATO is not actually very well perceived in Slovakia. So it makes sense to, you know, adjust COVID-19 narrative, disinformation narrative, in order to sort of play into these already pre-existing notions. In the Czech Republic, it was about 5G network, you know, and how that's somehow connected to the coronavirus pandemic. That's also something that we have seen in other countries, in the UK, for example. And we have also seen that people have been, you know, destroying communication towers as a result, basically, of this kind of conspiracy theory. So now to touch upon the impact on public perceptions of these disinformation and conspiracy theories. As I said, my colleagues published this report, Voices of Central and Eastern Europe, and I really recommend it because there is a lot of very interesting, if somewhat depressing data. But I'll give you just one example of, for example, how this, one of the very first, I'd say, or the most famous conspiracy theories is received across 10 different countries. So on the left side, we can see the data for those who believe that world affairs are not decided by elected leaders, but by secret groups which aim to establish a totalitarian world order. So actually Austria, Czech Republic and Hungary, you know, this conspiracy theory is not that prominent, even though, okay, 30% is also not a negligible number. But if you look at Romania, Bulgaria and Slovakia in particular, you
sorry, Miroslava, I don't see any slide beside the first one.
That's strange.
I don't know if the others have the same problem.
Do you? Okay, good that you've stopped me. So I'll try and reshare it again. Let me just try again. Okay. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. It may not be working from slide to slide, so I may need to be resharing the slides with you, but I hope you don't mind. But yeah, on this graph, you can actually see, you know, the prominence of this particular conspiracy theory across 10 nations. And as I said, you know, some countries like in Romania or Bulgaria and Slovakia, this is a very, very prominent conspiracy theory, and you actually have majority of population believing this type of conspiracy. So this is the way we measure impact of conspiracy theories and disinformation narratives, because there is really no other way of doing it, or at least not the one that would be easily available. But this kind of public opinion polling allows you to actually test some of these conspiracy narratives and compare them over time. So, and now I'll again have to reshare the screen. Sorry, this is slightly annoying, but yeah, okay. I'll try again. Okay, do you see the screen now? Okay, great. So now I'll move to the section about, you know, what are some of the initiatives actually trying to do something about disrupting this kind of disinformation environment, which has a really big influence on public perception. So one of the ways of doing it, and one which is perhaps not so often paid attention to, is to basically disrupt the economies of disinformation through disrupting the advertising revenue. Global Disinformation Index, which is a UK-based NGO, has recently published a report where they estimate that almost $80 million are annually paid to disinformation outlets through ad revenues. So this is just an estimate for Europe in particular, so the global number will be much higher. But it shows you that actually disrupting these kind of flows could really improve the healthiness of our information environment. And there are some initiatives that are already trying to do this. So in Slovakia, we have Konšpirátori SK. You know, in Czech Republic, there's similar initiative, which is called Analyst. And as I've mentioned, Global Disinformation Index is also trying to not only actually provide research and ratings for disinformation outlets, but also to kind of lobby for the European Union to do something about it. And so I'll start with Konšpirátori. Do you see the screen as well or no? Okay, good. So Konšpirátori, the system in which it operates is rather simple. You have a review board of different kinds of specialists of different areas, and they review websites which public basically sends them as a tip that, you know, this website could potentially be spreading disinformation or any kind of harmful narratives. Then the website is assessed on a scale on 1 to 10, you know, whereby 1 is safe, 10 is harmful, and anything over 5 is problematic. So basically companies who are interested in protecting their brand can decide not to advertise actually on these websites. And the way this is done is that either the website Konšpirátori SK shows you how to do that manually, or you can download a script and it will help you with your ads not being placed on these harmful pages, basically. Supporters include O2, you know, digital communication, PR agencies and others. But also I'd like to say about this project that it's a civil society initiatives, and the organizers or people who actually initiated this kind of project faced number of lawsuits from the offended pages, basically, and some of the pages have also removed the disinformation content from their pages because they were interested in advertising revenues from all sorts of companies. But it's quite, the project, faces a lot of critics, let's put it this way, because obviously nobody likes to be branded a disinformation outlet. The Czech initiative called Analyst has a bit of a more complex assessment system because they also use computer analysis to assess trustworthiness of the pages. Then they use a Fund for Independent Journalism for aspects of assessment, particularly related to sort of journalistic rigorousness. And then they also use assessment from Konspiratory SK. And they have also a lot of supporters, HBO, T-Mobile, Bauhaus, and others. And when it comes to Global Disinformation Index, they have this technical advisory group from quite prominent specialists who already have done a lot of research, in the area of disinformation. So these people have developed automated and manual assessment tool. Again, the structure of the problematic websites is AI assessed and the rest is assessed by human analysts. And they provide risk rating on a scale between 0 and 100. So all of these initiatives work basically on the same principle, that they just assess the page and they warn brands from potentially placing ads on these pages if they do not want to be associated with these pages. However, I mean, this is very nice that civil society initiatives like this exist, but actually it's not ever going to disrupt the ad revenue environment, because these are just very kind of, you can never create a systematic impact with a civil society initiative like that, unfortunately. So this needs a systematic solution. And in the code of practice on disinformation, which Google and Facebook are signatories to, they have actually made the commitment to the improvement of the scrutiny of ad placement. But as the recent reports from Global Disinformation Index show, they actually are falling short of this commitment. And so Global Disinformation Index advises the European Commission to actually include more metric specification into the code of practice on disinformation, and to actually make the ad agencies commit to elimination of ad services from known disinformation actors. So only a systematic solution could actually go a long way towards disrupting some of these ad revenues. But it's interesting, in Europe, if you look at the report of the Global Disinformation Index, most of the ad revenues, I believe 60% or so, are generated through Google ad agencies. So on one hand, they have committed to removing disinformation from their platforms, from Google Search, from YouTube, or are doing quite a lot. But on the other hand, when it comes to ad revenues, they are really not doing as much. So if more efforts were put on this aspect of the disinformation ecosystem, we could probably achieve quite significant results, in a relatively short span of time. So that's on my behalf. I hope I haven't spoken for longer than 10 minutes.
Of course, you have spoken longer, but it was very interesting. Thank you very much. I would only add from the Czech perspective that we have a Czech Google called Seznam.cz, which is also this automatic advertisement tool, and they are also under pressure from the Czech NGOs. There are a couple of initiatives similar to those you mentioned, which are like pushing the owners and managers to do that. So then, thank you, and let's go to Francesco and his 3 slides you have promised.
Yeah, I will be shorter, and let me just. Now you should see you see my first slide, which is just the title. Okay, then the event is foreign and domestic influence on media, but I will shift a bit from what Miroslava says, because it was really complete and interesting also to me. To be back a second on what happened last time. First, speaking about the situation in European Union, there is, as you know, the Digital Economy and Society Index that give an overview on different aspects. The use of internet services that also speak about disinformation, especially when it comes to integration of digital technology. So it's something that should be kept in mind. There are really different levels among Europe in digitalization. So there are places at different risk, but it's not true in at all. But in time we are living now, we have to think that this what this image doesn't show is that should be focused on small and middle enterprises. That because only 1/5 of small and middle enterprises are highly digitalized, and among European companies, only 12% of the companies are using big data analytics. That could be a thing for making artificial intelligence better and also fight the problem of disinformation in some situation. But of course, the problem is not only economic, because the digital transformation depends on many things that probably can't be solved in a political cycle. So it needs more effort. And there's something that can be done in meanwhile, also for speaking about disinformation, that is making people aware of what disinformation is, and especially what is a cyber security problem and the threat of a cyber risk. But speaking again about enterprises, there are only 24% of enterprises then planning compulsory training on the subject, that it's not a lot. And there are big gap between the member states, because if in Estonia and UK, 35% enterprise provide these courses, in Hungary and Greece, they are below 10%. So let me just go to the second. But I wanted to focus a bit on what happened, and sorry for the images and the appealing presentation, but it's important to think and on what happened in the last months. I mean, in overnight, almost many things have gone online. So that's why we're speaking today about disinformation especially. And it was interesting that for the first time, the third place where you were working was the kindergarten of your child and the sofa from where you were watching a Netflix series. So having a secure home environment meant having a safety in the workplace and safety of the classroom at the end, because someone was studying from home. And there are many, many things that can be done and many things that can be said. And I think that we have seen many webinars on these matters, but there are some things that I wanted to underline because it could be useful also for the attendee to these conferences. Because what I was thinking that I had a friend which is an ambassador, and he was no, we have good standards in our embassy. We use long string password, we use different password. Yes, but it comes time to time to find the email of embassies in the dark web. So there are some points that I wanted to underline. It is. So we can start from this slide, because if the pandemic had a serious impact on the society and economy, and as I said, on the small and medium enterprises, the cybercrime see the crisis as an opportunity. So phishing and ransomware attack arose, and ENISA provided this ideal 10 hygiene tips that is, I think, based also on the concept of pandemic. So management built-in means that it's important that the manager understand the importance of cybersecurity among the organization, and the management should be informed on a regular basis. The risk assessment, and it's need to understand what do I have to protect. So there are some priorities that that should be identified. And because the organization is facing a threat. Then when it comes to cybersecurity policies, there is necessary to take in place policies and appoint someone that is usually the security officer which is responsible for having an overlook of the situation. So as I spoke before, awareness, employees should understand what's the risk and should be formed and informed. Then update. Update is something that it's could be trivial or seems something, okay, it's automatic update. No, but update, it's really important to keep everything, meaning servers, workstation, smartphones, everything that come to the office, or in this case home, because we are working from home, updated, because some problems of the softwares can be exploited from malicious actions. So, and when it comes to backup, after to updated some means, it should be backuped. I mean, the backup should be in place, because one of the most important data can be backed up, and if there is a problem and you have to shut down your system, especially if you come to enterprises, to have it online and accessible again could save not only the work but a lot of money. Access management means to having policies to access the management and enforce them. So the password can be, for example, changed. The password are not shared. There are not USB pen brought from abroad inside the environment of the company, etc. And it's also important to come to the 8th point, the endpoint protection. So the endpoints should be secured from implementing software like antivirus, and it's easy, but it's something that sometimes it's forgotten. And if there is a remote access, it should be secured. Now it's everything on remote access, and the company should be sure that the communication is encrypted properly, because it's one of the main points, not to have the data theft. And at the end, but not less important, is to have a clear incident management plan, because there are two reasons on that. The first one is that because there could be different scenarios if you plan it after an attack spread. And the second point is that it's important to be in touch with the other companies that could be attacked, so to share also this kind of informations. And so there is need also, speaking about Europe and digitalization, of adopting some forward-looking policies, because there are many benefits from next generation and digitalization, both for economy and society. And Europe should leverage in focus area, which could be, for example, collaborative public-private partnership or advanced industrial engineering. And that can be also achieved on investing in digital education. That means not only awareness, but especially creating skills, high-level skills, especially technical. I mean, informatic engineers, but also reskilling, and as I said before. And just wanted to conclude that could be useful to strengthen at an European level the framework against cyber attacks in general. And that could also be extended to disinformation, of course. And I wanted just to remember that some restrictive measures are extended up to 2021 for those criminals that are threatening the European security and cybersecurity. So then, that's almost all, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Francesco. It was a bit more technical view, and Wojciech, Visegrad Insight has produced a report about information sovereignty, but you have also opportunity to comment on the previous two presentations.
Yeah, thank you. I will not refer, I will not show the presentation, and the two presentations already contain a lot of very nice, very important, interesting data. But of course, I will refer in a way to the concept of information sovereignty, to which both relate. Let me start by saying that we're talking about democracy here. I mean, it seems like technical details presented by Francesco and very kind of insider news and reports that Miroslava shared also on digital ads are of key importance, and we also look at that. We looked at that in the report. We continue to follow these. These are, but let's ask ourselves the question: why are we doing this? So I want to just make a small step back and then quickly jump forward with something to add to the discussion. So why are we doing that? It's a bit of a story with democracy, that democracies have been always measuring literacy levels. I mean, the level of literacy in democracy is the measurement of the health of democracy. How many literate person there are, and it's actually many agencies, many government agencies across the world, including US government, have been measuring literacy long before there was internet. Now, since we have internet, since we have digital information, that element of digital literacy also is of key importance. Why it is of key importance? Exactly like Miroslava explained, because this information, fake news, this disruptive news that aim to lower the coherence of democracy, they're preying on the weak. They're preying on those who are, not to say illiterate, but they are not reading news with understanding. And that is, or they're not reading books or any information with understanding. They're reading in order to reinforce their convictions or reinforce their conviction about conspiracies that run the world. That's easy solution. You don't need literacy to be able to read, but you need literacy in order to understand and to be able to be part of democracy, be part of democratic electoral process and deliberation that is there. So that was my step back, just to underline how important is that data and how important what Globsec is doing in monitoring and what Miroslava just shown is important. At the same time, you know, there is another question: do we need, especially in digital democracy, do we all need to know how to print a book? A digital book. So do we need to know and to be aware of all these technical aspects? And it seems yes, and in many ways, because everybody today is not only a reader, but is also a producer of online content. It's so important what Francesco just mentioned in terms of being aware of the digital tools that secure you and to make your information reliable and floating around. I would stress here, because I understand there are three elements how we can approach the topic of information sovereignty. On one element, there are these digital tools. On the second element, they're narratives. They're not only digital, but they're narratives. And the third pillar, and again, all-encompassing, is the environment. In all of those thrive. And this environment is somehow public space that is constituted by many things, and not only press, also books, but mostly press and media. And so far, democracies have been thriving where media and free press has been present. And the context of this is very important here. On one hand, we have an attack on media freedoms that challenge democracies in a structural way. It's not just accidental that, you know, something happens, but it's a structured, deliberate process of undermining media for the sake of undermining democracies. In that context, Central Europe seems to be like a polygon, as a training ground for many of the operations that may take place in Europe. That's why it's important, as part of European Union and part of European project, that the countries that we just focused on a bit with Miroslava and in our work at Visegrad Insight are so closely monitored, and their proper policies countermeasure in a way introduced. Now the good news and the bad news, or let's start with the bad news and the good news. The bad news is that the processes of undermining ecosystems of media is already much more advanced, and under pandemic, it's sped up in the countries of Central Europe. First of all, it's also because advertising markets in Central Europe are so much more digital than in other parts of Europe. Therefore, the processes of digital ad fraud, of undermining the credibility and also the money flow in the media in Central Europe have so much more impact on media here than elsewhere. But it's not a story that will stay all the way the same. This may infect, in a way, the processes that are elsewhere in Europe, and therefore European action to stop that is needed. Secondly, we see what is happening is through advertising market, even traditional advertising market, you see continuous efforts, even domestic, to undermine a free press. And that is the case of Hungary. Only recently we have seen this report of, basically it was a statement of editorial board of index.hu, a portal that so far has remained independent from highly centralized and government-controlled media space that was just making hostile takeovers. And this portal, Index.hu, has one of the highest reach in internet space in Hungary, is independent as a foundation, but its revenues and economic dependence is on advertising. And the advertising company that provided those ads has been taken over by the government. At this point in time, this week actually, Index.hu announced that the news will not longer be produced and published by the foundation, by the independent team of editors and journalists, but by companies that are fueled by money, and they will simply produce PR news. This is the challenge that we're facing if media markets are undermined and transformed fundamentally. And here I just link to our report, Information Sovereignty Futures, because there we outline the scenarios, 4 scenarios of how this transformation might take place, in what way it will endanger us. But now I'll stop with good news on pandemic and on COVID-19. Reports also from, now I'll point just to one, but we have many more across the world. Reports from Poland recently, from Dziennik Gazeta Prawna, actually this was, they reported on the research being conducted every 2 years on levels of digital literacy and press literacy among different groups. And under pandemic, over the last months, there was a 10% increase of readership of press among people from small, medium businesses. For instance, this press report, I mean, this news comes from a journal that is specifically focused on small, medium enterprises. So hence the data. I haven't read the full report yet. It has just been released. But it seems to me, according also to what Nieman Lab, Harvard Nieman Lab, monitoring press situation, media situation, innovation in this respect is showing that readership is rising, and also subscription base. So not only revenue from ads, but from subscribers is also on the rise. So there are some news from the COVID-19 that might be actually reinforcing information sovereignty in across the world, especially in democracies in Central Europe as well.
Thank you, Wojciech. I see that the 10 minutes in Slovakian, Italian, and Polish version are 15 for each of you. Well, to save some time, I propose first to stop recording to have a discussion of the record,